This is part 2 of the series on the inner workings of the social justice warrior mind. If you haven't read the first part, which shows all the theory behind it, I suggest you do, as the current blog builds upon its predecessor. You can find the link in the actual written blog. There I explained how I think the mind of all humans, not just social justice warriors in general, works. But today we will take a look at what forces drive the mind of the people who seem to go against all logic and reason. Please note that this is not meant as a generalization of all social justice warriors. It is a description of the worst case of it. Many will not have the complete package, but depending on how far they have gone, some will come very close, if not entirely fit this description. This is also not an attack on them. It is a psychological analysis to the best of my current abilities. I have put a lot of effort compared to what I usually do into this, and would say in terms of content quality it is by far my best blog so far. Before we start, one addition to part 1 that I realized only after it was written. It came to me while working on this very part. Generally speaking, the less difference between core truth, self-perception, and distorted image exists, the less stressful their daily life is. If discrepancies become too high, the membrane layers, protective ignorance, and private knowledge start to leak the truth. One cannot cover up everything, neither in front of others, as they will, no matter if only slowly, find out they are being deceived, nor to oneself, as our own conscience tells us the truth whether we want it or not. It will constantly try to remind us of what is right, what is wrong, and where we really are on the scale. The bigger the difference of these layers and the more fragmented, the more stress is put onto the body and mind alike, creating an unhappy, light-based life. Stress in any major study has real-world effects on the entire body and often increases the vulnerability to sickness, both physical and mental. Drilling into the mind of an SJW. The rabbit hole of misery. Layer 1. Distorted image. As before, we will drill down from the outer layers to the inner core. So we will start again with the distorted image. Just a quick reminder, this is what a person thinks another person thinks of the former. When you come into contact with a social justice warrior, they will try to create the image that they are superior to you. No doubt about it. They will try to do this through moral superiority, why we'll see when we drill down further. Moral superiority is all they ever talk about. Their ideas, multicultural, homophile, transphile, etc., and ideas, they always try to show all the good that is new and trendy, while at the same time hating everything that is in their view old and outdated. This is why they also call themselves progressives. But all of that has the slight flaw that it simply doesn't work. I touched on this a while ago in a blog called Weaponized Perfectionism. You can see the actual link in the written blog. That gets into how they can only think of the utopian end state where everything settles the way they hope, without realizing that the bridge to utopia has collapsed and they are blindly running over a cliff. Their efforts are similar to trying to trap a beam of light in a small box of mirrors. Even if the mirrors are perfect, no loss of energy, no loss of light focus during reflection. The time it takes to close the box is so long that the light will simply reflect until it either escapes or hits whatever it originated from. But they can only think of the theory that if you had a box of perfect mirrors on the inside, you could trap light. It's just not possible to do so. The method doesn't work. Everyone who gives the matter some thought will eventually come up with this result. That is why most people look at the unhinged mob at some of the rallies and instinctively want to get away from this ideology. The next thing might surprise a few people. They know it's impossible too, but they still act differently. Why we will see in the deeper layers. But moving on from the distorted image, the people this layer is presented to are mostly their fellow social justice warriors and people they want to convince or dominate. Among fellow social justice warriors, each one tries to one-up the other with perfection in the openly impossible quest for purity, and in theory there is nothing bad about this. The same forces drive free market, exceptionalism, and innovation. If it becomes all facade and no real substance behind it, the result will be collective misery. Modern times and especially social networks have played a large part in this. People are bombarded with the awesomeness of others that are often already exaggerating. Unable to compete, they can only turn up their volume and make themselves bigger than in reality, and so the noise level only rises among highly competitive communities like the social justice warrior one. It goes back to the alpha drive, the instinct of basically all life on Earth to dominate its peers and be on top, mostly for reproduction. Moving on, layer 2, private knowledge. While they are trying to keep the facade of perfection to fit into their vision of the perfect utopia, trying to align with their own unrealistic expectations, they do know just how much they are covering up. A lot of them not only know they have done in their own view despicable things that would get them kicked out of the club or rather cult, but also that they are lacking. For a weaponized perfectionist, the worst thing might just be realizing that they cannot ever be as perfect as they want to be. They have bad thoughts, like for example, what if I am wrong and insert here any dissenting voice they recently heard is right. Imagine the poor state of mental distress of the Fort Police when they realize they themselves violate their own rules. Then imagine how much worse it gets when the veil of lies that the Fort Police keeps up to justify itself and its claim to power gets pierced by the very people they want power over and the dirty truth leaks out. This is why dissent is the worst thing that can happen to any unjustifiable power structure. Worst case scenario, any more tensions to the cover could make the hose rip open an entire section. Thus, the private knowledge only serves the purpose to make others look up to that individual in an attempt to keep up the show and put lipstick on a pig. This alone creates intense unhappiness in people as laid out at the very start of this blog, talking about the leakage of layers. The process of keeping the image only limits one's possibilities when engaging with a third party in front of the people the image is directed to. This is moderately fancy wording for why some people act like a total scumbag in front of others but are totally nice when alone. They try their best to keep up the image of being tough, while they may not be at all. I'm going to assume everyone knows this from school, so here's an example to clarify. The main problem is that the best case scenario only hurts the relations between the bully and the bullied, though they could in fact be friends if it wasn't for the rest of the school watching. The worst case scenario is that the bully not only loses all possible ties, past, present, and future, with the bullied, but that his hypocrisy gets exposed and all turn their backs on him. This is a partial collapse of the distorted image that exposes the private knowledge underneath, which is bad for the bully. Thus, very often this kind of situation leads to doubling down. They say to themselves, okay, if this is going to hurt the victim, I better make it count and shed all doubt others may have in me. Certainly not all bullying, but part of it, and certainly why it sometimes escalates, is due to this. In essence, every private knowledge distorted image construct is a lie for a specific person or group in a specific situation and context. We all do it without even realizing. It's part of normal human social behavior. In most cases it will be negligible. But over sometimes decades a lot builds up, when exposed, puts relations to others to the test. A good example is when old habits are exposed, like having an affair with someone else than the official boy or girlfriend or even husband or wife, or an addiction or affiliation the family or friends are openly opposed to. The worst may not be the fact that whatever was going on happened, but it is all the lies that are now exposed. Layer 3. Self-perception. If you could get an honest answer from a social justice warrior asking them, how would you describe yourself? Or, what do you believe in and why? Without the filter of private knowledge, they would most likely answer, I don't really know myself. But other than that, there's a surprising lack of tangible content in the self-perception layer. All the effort is not put into building a character that has ideas, convictions or steadfast beliefs that withstood the test of time and questioning from all angles. It is because they need to be partially fluid in order to keep creating and maintaining their private knowledges, as well as accepting whatever the most recent highest purity is. More about that at the end of this blog. This is where the famous Orwellian doublethink comes in. To shortly explain, this is the concept of believing a certain thing while also believing something that is in direct conflict with it. Basically, as a visualization, believing that racism is the worst thing ever, and then talking about how bad white people are. With the belief changing based on the context or the people involved, often oscillating in a matter of seconds and less. The explanation here is that social justice warriors have fragmented their self-perception layer into as many fragments as needed, in the same way that they have many private knowledges to fit many distorted images. Fragments aren't fixed either, they change whenever needed. It is a bit confusing, but I'll try my best to explain. The amount of distorted image layers corresponds to the amount of people, groups of people, situations, contexts, and much more. Each distorted image is kept by its own private knowledge. And with such a great amount of private knowledge distorted image constructs, it has become impossible to keep up with having just one self-perception. Normally you can believe that the skin color doesn't matter and that white people are inherently bad at the same time, but you can have two self-perceptions, one for when you talk in the context of colonialism and segregation and all its associated private knowledge distorted image constructs, and one when you talk about everything else and all other private knowledge distorted image constructs. It strikes me as very schizophrenic, though no additional personalities need to be involved. Finally, it is important to notice that context matters as much, if not more, than the people talk to when selecting the current private knowledge distorted image construct and its corresponding self-perception. They can literally, when asked, does skin color matter in any way, deny, but a second later when asked, should we fight white privilege, they will be all for it. Layer 4. Protective ignorance. As we get closer to the core, it only shows to what lengths a social justice warrior goes to fit in with all the others and how much damage this causes to their mind. In the same way that they create private knowledge distorted image constructs for others around them, they had to create multiple protective ignorance self-perception constructs to maintain a straight face when managing the variant packages of private knowledge distorted images. As a result, their protective ignorance layer is also fragmented. The same way that every private knowledge creates its own distorted image, every protective ignorance creates its own self-perception. This is how they hypnotize themselves to buy into every narrative that fits their goals. The longer this process continues, the more fragmented and fluid everything becomes, and the more difficult it gets to reverse or repair the damage caused to the mind. In fact, I'm not sure it's even possible to help them after a certain point. This is why in other blogs before I said that in the future, when the cultural war is over, we might have to put these people into mental institutions that maintain their illusion until they die. Because if the protective ignorance disappears and all over the years aggregated tension explosively hits the self-perception, it will most likely destroy their mind entirely, punching through all layers. This is a mental breakdown I talked about in the previous part. Then again, it might be possible to employ a tabula rasa strategy and on purpose let it all collapse, trying to build a working mind on the ruined social justice warrior remains. Another way could be using powerful amnesia-inducing drugs, or maybe a combination of it all. I'm open for input on that, but before you write your suggestions, please listen to this blog to the end to understand just how extensive the damage is. If left to reality, they will most likely split into the people that can manage to survive the realization that everything they believed up to now was wrong, and those who will go mad and lose their mind, commit suicide, go on killing sprees, or in other ways harm themselves and others around them. Because they are wrong, and in their innermost sanctum they know it. Which brings us to the final layer. Layer 5. Core Truth. Deep down, so my theory, social justice warriors know they are wrong. They know they cannot possibly keep up the facade forever. They know how bad and rotten their entire mental structure is. This is what leaks through all the protective ignorances into the self-perceptions, and from there through the private knowledges into the distorted images, as well as, explained in the previous part, directly from core truth through private knowledge into the distorted images. The membranes cannot take the pressure, however they won't accept that this is the case. They are too far down the hole to climb back up, so they see going down to the bottom and hoping for salvation, as everything just gets darker and darker by the meter as their only hope. But the reason why they can't back up to the surface, in fact why they ended up in this state at all, is because they are fundamentally lazy. More on that in a bit. All of this is the reason for why, when confronted with the truth, their reaction is almost always, after a certain point in 100% of cases, doubling down. These are some of the realizations that they know in their inner sanctum but never want to accept. They are the inner voices of reason that torment them instantly as soon as the tiniest shift occurs in any layer. Other people have real skills. They are acquired through hard work. But I have nothing worth to show. My only option is to claim moral superiority, easily achieved through forcing myself to believe the right kind of things. It can be done in a second and changed however I see fit. It doesn't ever accomplish anything, but it lets me stand at least halfway tall around people with real achievements. This is why their protective ignorance and self-perception layers have also become fragmented and fluid. For my own ego, which is the alpha drive, I need to stand at the top of the food chain, but I cannot do it because others have real skills and I only have illusions. But in modern societies I can get them to bow down to me if I pull out the shame card. They will look down on what they did wrong, even if I fail at many, many more and very basic things. Still, while they look down, I'll be looking up. This is why they have to fight and put others down. It's the last remnants of their natural alpha drive. Finally, it, in combination with the reasoning before, explains what I was pointing to at the very start when I said they would always go for moral and only moral superiority. If I were to put in the effort, perhaps I could achieve what they have, but it would require me to work for it. I am too lazy to work, and all others have a headset that I won't be catching up anyway. It will be better to intensify what I'm already doing. This is why they cannot solve their problems. They would be capable of doing so, or at least being humans should be, but they are used to giving in and taking the easy way out. Always. In the end, all my problems come from being too lazy to work, too lazy to change, too lazy to question, too lazy for reality. Making an illusion big enough for me to believe in myself, protective ignorance, self-perception constructs, will feel pleasant without the work, for a while, until it collapses. But I am too lazy to even think about ways to avoid this problem now. This is learned helplessness in its purest form. Conclusion. And there you have it, the reason why social justice warriors act the way they do. This is their core, all of them have it in varying intensities, without exception that I know of. It is true that excessive laziness is the root of all problems, at least for them. From here it all can be explained. The way they act, why they can be total hypocrites, why they feel so horrible and dead inside, why they lash out at perceived Nazis and racists, why they always go for the next big hype and never look back to reflect on their actions or beliefs. Why they openly avoid all free thought that could lead them to painful realization by their own choice. I touched on this quite a while ago, talking about the self-sustained matrix in a previous blog. You can see the link once again in the written blog. Why they look over open discrepancies in their worldviews and actions. Why they are so miserable and yet continue down the same path. The leakage throughout the layers causes them nothing but suffering. In a way, words truly are violence to them. Truth is like a stake piercing the illusion they live and exposes just how much misery they have stored up as tension between all their layers, from core truth to distorted image and back. The best possible metaphor I can think of is like having a 2 or 3 week big dumps stored in your gut, and constantly avoiding to defecate because it will hurt like hell. But every second only continues the suffering, damages the body, and will make the inevitable result worse. They could solve their problems and at least limit the damage by pain right now for a limited time, but they don't have the strength, courage, or self-confidence to endure it. And so they only get worse and worse, fragmenting their mind, toxifying their social environment, building up even more of what would already kill them until reality, which never pulls its punches, comes at them with full force and the weight of all their discrepancies packed into the mother of all blows, hitting them directly in their mental integrity. This would destroy all of us at a certain point. The state of mind is very close to cognitive dissonance, a condition where a person cannot take an action due to a psychological hurdle. If they were to take the action, it would go against, in most cases, their ego or convictions. Like, for example, in current times it would be good to invest into gold, but for many this would mean accepting the possibility that the economy could crash. Thus they cannot do it, even though it would be best for them. But here is not a normal cognitive dissonance, it's a highly advanced form of it, where it's no longer about accepting a single fact or going beyond the ego, it's about going against all convictions and throwing away the entire world view, something that would utterly end that person's character. Even if afterwards a new one forms, the old at that point would have been absolutely razed to the ground. Still, the five-layer model also explains all forms of cognitive dissonance. Breaking it is the act of letting truth from the core truth flow directly and unfiltered, bypassing the protective ignorance into the self-perception. Understanding all of this explains why it's so hard to shake them out of their daydream. It would require them to have courage against their worst enemy, which is themselves, when all they have ever done is taking the easiest road available. As mentioned before, the longer they descend into what I call the rabbit hole of misery, the less possible will be the mere thought of getting back up. Naturally, there are people who would try to assist them. They would want to wake them up and get through, hoping they still have a tiny fragment of common sense inside. I count myself among them, but this is a well-meaning attack on the social justice warrior mind. Their hate for all voices of dissent comes from the pain that they bring. The moment of bursting comes closer and they fear, with right, for their very lives. This panic gives them the vigor to fight against all that could possibly shorten the fuse. Every time you see a social justice warrior lashing out at people who try to help them, it's the instinctual self-preservation kicking in. It also makes social justice warriors extremely susceptible to quite literally any false prophet promising salvation at the end of the tunnel. Even if hope is slim or the con gain is obvious to anyone, including the social justice warrior him or herself, they will go with it, no questions asked. And so these false prophets that know how to manipulate have created their very own zombie army. They didn't have to create a virus. All they had to do was incentivize laziness and convenience, telling these mind-infected that they are okay, until they are far enough down the tunnel and no longer think of the way back up. I don't know about you, but God, do I feel sorry for people in this situation. I literally cannot hate these people knowing what I do. I feel empathy. I want to help them, but they want to prevent it. This is a mental disease where the cure could kill them, and instead of taking heart and a chance, they would rather just as comfortably as possible succumb. Anything to keep the pain out for just another second. So they hypnotize themselves, they ignore all that would lead to the truth, and created a lie of a life just for themselves, from which they hope they will never wake up. This is the reality of the existence of, again in varying intensities, all social justice warriors and most likely other groups in a similar state. I have to admit that at the moment I cannot think of other examples. You are welcome to add here. Be warned, this is what the easy way or the way leads to. It is what constant cowardice makes a person, the ultimate destination of pure laziness. Do yourself a favor, don't make this mistake. Question yourself, what do I simply not want to accept? Do I bend myself to fit into a crowd too much? Who do I want to like me so much that I change for the worse? Do I have tension somewhere that I should relieve before it gets too painful to do so? Am I procrastinating this relief process somewhere? Train yourself to break cognitive dissonance. The way to happiness, or so I believe, is having a low tension between your layers, just as I mentioned at the very beginning of this blog. It's a state of mind where you can live in a high degree of truth with others, where you don't rely on your image, but instead your character itself becomes your image. In essence, your distortive images, self-perception, and core truth are as identical as possible. It would be as simple as finding the tension building up inside and releasing it. Just like taking a dump when you feel you have to and not wait until it gets worse. But we as humans, we like to avoid inconveniences and a little suffering, and we like to push it back on the to-do list and say, oh, just a bit longer won't hurt, until it does. And then we cry like the little babies that we are inside as we are confronted with the results of our actions. So how about we do something revolutionary? Solve problems while they are still small. Let's be honest and open to others we have wronged when it becomes clear, instead of having the truth hang above our heads like the sword of Damocles. Tells you one of the worst hypocrites that on a regular basis ignores all the rules himself and in almost half an hour of monologue acts like he knew what he was asking for. Finally, please note that this is just my interpretation of all. How the human mind works, how social justice warriors are inside, and by no means think of this as the only truth. If you have any suggestions or additions to this, please write it in the comments. Other than that, I thank you for your attention and hope to speak to you in the future.